Calix first heard whispers of the shrine from an old mountain traveler, a hidden place high beyond the usual pathways, concealed in the thickest patches of the pines. The traveler's voice, cracked by decades of harsh winds, had shaken when he spoke of it. "The shrine sees deeper than our reflections," he had said. "It shows you your last moments on this earth." That single cryptic phrase lodged itself in Calix's mind, the seeds of a dark fascination taking root. He was not a man who cowered at fables, but something in the traveler's eyes told him this was no ordinary folk tale. So one autumn morning, carrying only a small knapsack with provisions, he began the steep journey. The trail was barely a trail at all, just a winding dirt corridor littered with loose rocks and twisted roots that threatened to trip him. The air grew colder as he ascended, sunlight dimming through thick canopies of pine. The birds seemed quieter here, the wind sharper. Every half hour or so, he found a stray icon carved into a tree trunk or a smooth stone etched with strange symbols. They looked neither welcoming nor threatening, but gave him a sense that he was nearing something beyond the ordinary. He pressed on, feet grinding into gravel and pine needles until, late in the afternoon, he found the shrine. At first glance, it looked like a simple wooden structure, no taller than a man's chest. Its roof was formed by overlapping shingles, weathered almost black. Gray moss sprouted between the cracks, clinging to it like an ancient second skin. The shrine's doors were the size of a book, slightly ajar, and behind them a dark, unlit interior. It rested upon a stone platform etched with a ring of foreign characters. Everything around him felt suddenly hushed, as though the forest itself held its breath. Calix circled it. No path continued beyond. The shrine stood alone on a small clearing. Birds perched on the branches above him, their eyes alert but silent. He felt as though he were being studied from all sides. Impulsively, he reached out and touched the shrine's door. It gave way without a sound, swinging on hidden hinges that did not creak. Within the shrine's wooden interior, he saw a smooth slab of black stone. Warmth emanated from it, even though the air was cold. He leaned closer, curious. The old traveler's words reverberated in his mind. "It shows you your last moments." He knew it was absurd to take such a claim at face value, yet some irrepressible part of him hungered to test it. He inhaled slowly and placed both hands on the stone slab. The day's light seemed to flicker, as if overshadowed by an invisible cloud. For an instant he felt sure he had touched a source of living power. Suddenly an image flashed across his mind. He stood in a rocky alleyway, the sky overhead black with storm clouds. His heart pounded in his ears and his hands were slick with blood, his own blood. A strangled croak came from his throat as he sank to his knees. Then the vision vanished, thrusting him back into real time. Breathing heavily, Calix wrenched his hands away and stumbled back. The shrine looked unchanged, silent as ever, but the memory of that brief flash forward churned in his mind, a premonition of his demise, if the old tales were true. As the initial shock ebbed, he dismissed it. Perhaps it was a self-induced hallucination. His mind had conjured it because of the tall tales he'd been told. Yet his heart hammered wildly, and he noted every detail, the gray gravel of the alley, the taste of copper in his mouth, and the overwhelming sense of inevitability. He stayed in that clearing for hours, pacing back and forth, glaring at the shrine. He wasn't sure if fear or curiosity was stronger. In the end, he lit a small campfire, deciding to watch it overnight. If the shrine held genuine power, perhaps he'd witness something else. But no more visions haunted him that evening, and around midnight, the forest seemed to vanish beneath a blanket of darkness. Even moonlight struggled to penetrate the canopy. Early morning found him exhausted. His lungs drank in the cold air as the first rays of sun slid among the trees. He had come for a reason, and the glimpse he'd seen was too vivid to ignore. But he needed something, some proof that he was not alone in this strange experience. So he decided to descend the mountain and share his findings with those who might be equally compelled, or foolish enough to return with him. And share he did, though cautiously, spinning the tale for a handful of acquaintances whose eyes lit with the same mix of fear and obsession. Within a week, Calix convinced two companions to make the trek back up the mountain. Una, a quiet woman who had a skeptic's zeal for debunking mysteries, and Damon, whose fascination with death bordered on the macabre. The climb was arduous, but they followed Calix's markings on the trees and arrived at the clearing by midday. Una approached the shrine first. Her slender fingers, always near a notepad or a camera, now hovered over the black stone. Damon watched, arms crossed, as though unconvinced this was anything but an elaborate hoax. Calix braced himself, recalling what happened when he'd touched it. Una pressed her palm to the stone. Her brow furrowed, and her eyes widened. A single tear traced down her cheek. She flinched away after several seconds, panting and cradling her hand. For a moment, she didn't speak. Damon and Calix exchanged glances, the hush of the forest pressing in. "Fire," Una said at last, voice quivering. "I suffocated. In a burning room. I could smell the smoke, feel the heat on my skin, and then She trailed off, shivering. Damon ran a hand through his dark curls, stepping back from the shrine. He had initially scoffed, but the raw terror in Una's eyes was impossible to ignore. Calix tried to form words, but nothing came. Finally, Damon set his jaw. In defiance, or perhaps desperation to prove them wrong, he moved closer to the shrine, kneeling as though in reverence. Slowly he laid both hands on the black stone. His lips parted in a silent gasp, his face contorted, less fear, more twisted fascination. He closed his eyes. Seconds passed like hours before he jerked back, rolling onto the cold dirt as though escaping something that gripped his soul. He let out a trembling chuckle. A tall building, glass windows shining in the sun. Then I fell. It was so fast. The rush of air tore at me. He exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. I was on the pavement in a blink. Broken. Calix's pulse thudded. Two new visions, both dire, matching his own. He suddenly felt the weight, as though some entity within the shrine had laced him in invisible chain. None of them spoke of whether these futures could be avoided. Perhaps that was a question too big for the moment. Instead, Calix and his companions agreed that they had uncovered something extraordinary and horrifying. That same day, while gathering a bit of wood to start a fire, Calix found footprints leading to a cluster of shrubs east of the clearing. They were deeper than his, perhaps from someone heavier and fresh. Odd, he thought. The shrine was remote, and they'd seen no one else ascending the mountain. The idea that strangers lurked here, silent, made the hair on his neck rise. He followed the footprints for a few yards before they disappeared. No sign of a campsite, no sign of anyone. He returned to the others, unsettled but uncertain what to make of it. By the next afternoon, more figures emerged. A small group led by a man named Shinji, who had heard rumors of the death shrine. They carried rucksacks bulging with supplies, as though planning a longer stay. Among them was a woman, Rhea, whose anxious eyes darted around the clearing. When asked how they learned of the shrine, Shinji shrugged. It's become a local legend. Word travels fast. A wave of unease passed over Calix. He had never intended for word to spread so far so soon. Nonetheless, he managed a cautious greeting, and before long they all settled around a pair of campfires in the clearing. The conversation was subdued, each person harboring an unspoken question. Were they truly about to glimpse their own death? After a fretful night, two men from Shinji's group tested the shrine, returning wide-eyed and pale. Their descriptions, one drowned with lungs collapsing, another collapsed in a hospital bed, consumed by an unknown disease, left a tangible heaviness in the air. It took hold, like an illness of the mind, each new vision confirming the shrine's harrowing power. As day followed night, more people arrived. Some came alone, seeking a final answer to the ultimate mystery of mortality. Others arrived in pairs or trios, eyes gleaming with a strange mixture of terror and excitement. Soon, the clearing was no longer a mere campsite, but a macabre gathering spot, dotted with tents and low voices, no one quite sure what to do with the knowledge that death had been laid bare. Some prayed feverishly, as if repentance might rewrite what they had seen. Others retreated into themselves, lost in the labyrinth of their thoughts. One evening, a fierce argument erupted between Damon and a newcomer named Quinn. Damon had grown increasingly restless. his usual sardonic composure fraying. He had begun to fixate on the idea that the shrine's visions were not set in stone. "Why else would it show us?" he exclaimed, voice cracking. "It's giving us a warning. If we know how it happens, we can avoid it." Quinn, who had been told he would die alone in a hospital room, saw it differently. "Death can't be cheated," he insisted, ignoring the sweat beading on his forehead. "All you'll do is drive yourself mad." At that, Damon's patience snapped. He lunged at Quinn, shoving him to the ground. The scuffle was brief. Kalex and Shinji pulled them apart. But the atmosphere of the camp shifted. Paranoia crept in. People began casting suspicious glances at one another, as if death itself might be catching. That same night, Yuna confessed to Kalex that she hadn't slept well since her vision. "I keep running from fire in my dreams," she whispered, huddled outside her tent. Her hair hung limply around her face. "It's different each time, but I always wake up when I can't breathe." Kalex nodded, understanding the torment. He found himself picturing the dark alley from his own vision, haunted by the sensation of blood in his mouth. He swore he could smell the metallic tang if he lingered on the memory too long. In some moments, he wondered why he hadn't left this cursed mountain, but like all the others, he felt tethered to the shrine, as if everything else in life had paled in comparison to this singular truth they had glimpsed. Days blurred together, shadows stretched beneath the trees, and tension hung like an oppressive cloud. Food supplies dwindled, water was always a concern. Some left after confronting their visions, choosing to flee the creeping dread. Others clung to the clearing, believing they might gain deeper insight, or perhaps transform the prophecy. A few, destabilized by what they had seen, fell into near madness. One man spent hours chanting in a hollow monotone about rewriting destiny. Another woman wept inconsolably each night, claiming she saw her children weeping over her casket. One afternoon, a wary hush swept the camp when a new arrival wandered in. She was older, her gray hair bound into a loose bun, her face set with a grim yet resolute calm. She said her name was Fumiko. Immediately, Kalex sensed she was different. She carried an air of acceptance rather than fear. When she approached the shrine, no one tried to dissuade her. By now, any illusions of safety or disbelief were shattered. Her hands touched the black stone. Seconds passed. Her face scarcely changed expression, though her eyes shuddered with flickering horror. She drew back, bowing her head, and softly uttered, "I saw my next winter. My heart stopped in my sleep." She paused, voice steady. It was peaceful. "Not the worst way to go, is it?" Kalex exhaled, almost grateful that at least one person's vision was gentle. "You're not scared?" he asked. "Of course I am," she replied, rubbing her palms as if to rid them of an unseen residue. "But it's better than some ways." Then, with a trembling laugh beneath her breath, she added, "And it gives me time to prepare." That night, Fumiko's serenity drew people to her like moths to a flame. She spoke calmly of the shrine's ill reputation among villagers in her youth. She said that according to some legends, the shrine once served as a gateway between worlds, revealing glimpses of the day souls departed. Over time, the villagers had abandoned it, believing it brought misfortune. A hush fell over the group as she spoke. She shrugged, offering a simple conclusion. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps they were wise to leave it alone. Yet few in the camp were prepared to relinquish the lure of its forbidden knowledge. The arguments grew more frequent. Damon in particular became fixated. His eyes glowed with mania whenever he spoke of preventing his fall from the skyscraper. He ran all the possible ways he might avoid tall buildings. "I just won't go near them," he'd say, almost feverish. "I'll never step foot inside a downtown office or rooftop party again." Kalex wondered if that would be enough to divert fate, or if the shrine's bleak prophecy might unfold in some impossible-to-foresee manner. That was what kept him awake, the notion that destiny was an unmovable anchor. It was near dusk when the madness truly broke the camp's fragile calm. Yuna, consumed by terror of burning alive, destroyed her own tent in a panic, believing the flame would originate there. She tore at the canvas, scattering supplies in her frenzy to rid herself of anything flammable. Shinji tried to calm her, but she clawed at him, screaming that the shrine's vision was drawing nearer. Calyx and Fumiko managed to restrain her, yet her eyes were wild, tears staining her face. A group huddled around quietly, unsettled by her meltdown. Damon paced about, fists clenched, muttering to himself that he was never going to fall if he could help it. That night, a fire did break out, but not in Yuna's tent, for she had torn it apart. Instead, it ignited near Shinji's tent, possibly from an unattended lantern. Chaos erupted. The orange flames jumped across the dry forest floor, reaching for pockets of pine needles, devouring the edges of a second tent. People scattered, frantically stamping the flames. Thick smoke billowed. Yuna let out a shriek, stumbling backwards in terror. Fumiko dashed in with a bucket of water from the stream. Calyx joined her, smothering flames with a blanket. In the confusion, Damon, choking on smoke, joined the effort. Bit by bit they managed to douse the fire, leaving a scorched patch of earth and a few singed tents. Yuna still trembled uncontrollably, racked by coughs and sobs, certain she'd narrowly escaped her vision. Others silently stewed in the acrid haze, reminded anew of how close death felt. In the aftermath, some decided it was too much. A handful exhausted their supplies and their courage, packing up to leave the mountain. Rhea, who had arrived with Shinji's group, told him she could no longer bear sleeping in the shadow of the shrine. She had already seen her vision, a quiet, anticlimactic death in an empty house. She wanted to spend what time she had left surrounded by life, not by dread. Shinji, torn between supporting her and his own fascination, hesitated. In the end, he hiked down with her in silence. Midway through the following day, an uneasy peace settled over the smaller group that remained. Calyx, Yuna, Damon, Fumiko, Quinn, and two other silent, brooding men. They formed a ring of half-burnt tents around the shrine, each wrestling with personal terror in a private way. The forest felt haunted, each gust of wind like a whisper reminding them of their fragile mortality. Fumiko quietly announced her intention to descend the mountain by sunset. "I know what's waiting for me," she said. "There's no point in letting it consume me." She offered a warm, matronly look to Calyx, encouraging him to do the same, but he sensed unfinished business here. He could not explain it, only that he felt entangled in the shrine's power, as if some resolution was necessary. Fumiko nodded in acceptance of his choice and said her farewells just before dusk. That evening, the rest gathered around the dwindling fire. The flicker of flames cast dancing shadows across their faces. Damon's left eye twitched as he stared at Quinn. Yuna seemed numb, eyes fixed on nowhere. The other two men rarely spoke, so the hush was broken only by the crackle of wood. Calyx weighed whether to ask them to leave in the morning. Perhaps if everyone left, the shrine's hold would loosen, and sanity could return. But Damon broke the silence first. "We can't let it do this to us," he said softly. "We have to prove it wrong." "How?" Yuna asked, voice shaky. Damon's gaze swept over them. "We destroy it." Quinn scoffed. "It's just an old wooden structure. You think that'll erase the visions?" But the idea grabbed hold anyway. If the shrine was the source of these prophecies, shattering it might free them from the oppressive sense of doom. For some, it was a desperate hope. Calyx, however, recalled the warm power he'd felt from the black stone. He doubted a mere attempt at destruction would bring them solace. Yet something in Damon's desperation resonated with him. "I don't know if it'll help," Calyx said, his throat dry. "But I can't see what else we can do." As the hour grew late, they doused the campfire, leaving only their dim lanterns. Moonlight, half hidden by clouds, fell upon the shrine's mossy roof. Damon, Quinn, the two silent men, and Calyx seized axes or large rocks. Yuna stood apart, clutching her shaking arms. The small group circled the shrine, breath visible in the cold. Finally, Damon swung an axe at one of the wooden posts. The impact reverberated across the clearing, shaking the quiet in a deep, resonant pulse. The shrine's post cracked part way. A rumble of energy passed through the ground. Calyx felt it in his bones, and the air suddenly crackled with static. Quinn raised a stone overhead and brought it down on the roof, splintering shingles and sending shards of wood flying. Una cried out in alarm, staggering back. The two men battered the structure from the sides. Bits of rotting wood gave way. Within minutes, the shrine's humble frame lay partially collapsed. Yet the black stone remained, solid and unscathed. It bore no visible dent from the blows. Damon, sweat streaming down his face, moved towards it with his axe. "I'll end this," he panted, lifting the blade. As he struck, sparks flew, the clang echoing in the clearing. But the stone held firm, not even chipped. Damon cursed, striking again and again until his arms quivered with exhaustion. Calix tried to help, swinging a steel hammer at it, but the stone seemed invulnerable to mere force. In that frantic moment, a searing light blazed across Calix's mind, a flash reminiscent of his first vision but stronger. He saw fragments of futures, Damon tumbling from a great height, Una engulfed by flames, Quinn in a hospital bed, and himself in that alley with blood running from his mouth. The intensity of it wrenched a scream from him. He staggered, dropping the hammer, falling to his knees. The others doubled over as though struck by an invisible wave. Una wept openly, wailing as flames danced behind her eyes. Damon let out a strangled roar, whether in frustration or horror Calix could not tell. Moments later, the light faded. The stone remained, monolithic, and the battered shrine lay in ruins around it. In the aftermath, the group fell into turmoil. One of the silent men, reeling, fled into the darkness, stumbling down the path, determined to escape the shrine's reach. Quinn followed soon after, though more calmly, as if in surrender to a fate he could not change. Damon dropped the axe, shaking uncontrollably, muttering, "We can't stop it. We can't stop it." Una sank to the ground, her tears spent, eyes dull with despair. Calix surveyed the wreckage. The shrine was nearly gone. Only jagged splinters of wood remained. Yet the black stone glistened with the same ominous energy, defiant, eternal. He looked at Una, Damon, the few who remained. Perhaps the intangible had been revealed. The shrine was merely a conduit for something bigger, something that refused to be destroyed by mortal hands, an unstoppable tide that reminded them of life's inescapable end. In the morning, a fragile silence enveloped the clearing. The stench of charred wood and damp earth lingered from the ruin. Rain had come in the night, dousing them in a cold drizzle. Damon was gone, presumably descending the mountain, but Una remained, sitting at the edge of the clearing, staring at nothing. Calix squatted beside her, unsure what to say. All that had transpired weighed on them. In the distance, the black stone sat among the debris of the shrine, unyielding. Shivering, Una turned her gaze to Calix. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked. "Coming here, seeing what we saw?" "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I suppose knowledge has a price." She stood on unsteady legs, leaning on him for support. Together they packed what remained of their gear. The mountain felt suffocating now, the knowledge of future doom too heavy to stay beneath. Calix looked over at the stone one last time, caught between irreverence and awe. In that silent moment, a faint wind stirred, rustling the broken shards of wood. He thought he heard a whisper in the rustling, but whether it belonged to the shrine or his own imagination, he could not be certain. When he and Una finally began the descent, neither spoke much. Their steps were slow, careful in the rugged terrain. Some part of him was relieved to be leaving that place behind. Yet another part remained transfixed by the inevitability they had seen. Ultimately, his journey up the mountain had not changed death's surety. It had merely brought it into sharper focus. He felt the weight of that knowledge pressed into his bones. It would shape his every decision, coloring his dreams with the memory of a bloodied alleyway. After an hour of walking in silence, Una paused to sip water from a narrow stream. She wiped her mouth, glancing back up the trail. "I'm not convinced we can outrun what we saw," she admitted, voice subdued. "But maybe, by knowing, we won't waste what time we have." "That might be the only redemption," Calix said, wishing to hold on to something that felt like hope. He steeled himself against the chill and the wind. In his heart, he knew that fate marched forward, unconcerned with their attempts at escape or defiance. Perhaps all they could do was live, truly live, until that final hour came. So they continued down the path, the forest once more swallowing them in its dark hush. Behind them, the shattered remnant of the shrine stood as a grim testament to the power it wielded. Unbroken stone at its center, a silent guardian of visions of the end. Even in ruin, it remained a magnet for those desperate or curious enough to seek it out, a place where a glimpse of death could drive them to madness or to a new appreciation for time itself. Calyx felt certain the ancient rumor would not die here. It would spread, and more would trek up the mountain. For some, the knowledge would be too much. For others, a necessary burden. The trees thickened and the clearing vanished from sight. By dusk, they would make camp further down among the foothills, with the quiet roar of a distant river as their lullaby. Calyx didn't know what awaited him in the blood-smeared alley from his vision, nor the exact day it would come, but as he pressed onward, a current of determination flowed through him. If death lay ahead, he would face it, eyes open. Perhaps that was all any of them could do, live defiantly, knowing the truth of their end. And in living fully, perhaps they would wrest a shred of victory from the unblinking face of fate.